All right, so Jack Parkhouse, welcome to the Disenfranchised. How are you doing today?
I'm really well, Ed, actually. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, no, it's a real pleasure to have you here, and yeah, thank you for reaching out and wanting to get involved with this podcast. I really appreciate it. And as soon as I saw your name pop up on my email, I thought, yeah, it'd be great to have a chat with Jack and see, yeah, why he became the BFA award winner for Next Generation Franchisee. So we'll dig into that in a moment or two, but. Before we do, it'd be great to just find out what was your first job.
So I thought about this when you sent the kind of the bio through about what the questions would be, and if I'm honest, I'm not entirely sure because I have two, and I couldn't tell you in terms of chronology exactly which way round they were, but I had the typical paper round that everybody had when they were sort of 14,
Yeah.
15. But when I applied for that, I didn't factor in the fact that I lived at the bottom of a massive, great big hill, and the route that the guy gave me was essentially all uphill from my house. So that lasted about a fortnight, and then we found something else to do. Um, and also at the time, my dad was running a business down in Southeast Kent that looked after. They did bathrooms and kitchen supplies and fits and installs and that type of thing. Just at the time when computer aided design came in, and he had a
Yeah.
team of salespeople that would like sketch out drawings for people and things like that. And came home one day with this CD-ROM of this trial, and sort of like threw it at me across the dinner table and said, see what we can do with that. And because it was pretty idiot-proof, and because I was used to using a computer, I managed to get my head around that pretty quickly. So for about 6 months, I was designing kitchens off of like hand-drawn sketches, so they could then print them out on our pretty rubbish printer at home and take them back into the office the next day to show clients. It was like the first CAD that was being used by suppliers.
It's pretty
And then
fancy
the sales
technology
guys,
back then, really, wasn't it?
well, it was to a certain extent. Then the guys in the office realised how simple it was, and then I was quickly, punted out, and I wasn't needed anymore. But that was good fun for a while because it was a bit of extra pocket money and something I suppose somewhat entrepreneurial. Didn't need to be doing it, and gave me a bit of an insight into something different.
Yeah, not bad at all. Do you remember how much your dad was paying you per design?
Not enough, not enough. I think I was sort of getting a surcharge on the electric and the use of the computer, but he was always pretty generous. From memory, it would have been 20, 25 quid a go, something like that, which, back then for 3 or 4 hours work at 14, 15, I was more than grateful for.
Yeah, not
And
bad.
I think it worked really well for them because you know, they took the time to learn how to use it. I think if it had fallen flat, they probably wouldn't have bothered teaching the guys in the shop. But yeah, and then, nowadays you get all sorts of different things, don't you? So they were certainly onto something.
Yeah, no, it's cool. So it's good. It's good to get involved in the family business, I suppose, and to kind of see that kind of work inside without too many pressures involved, I guess. But did you ever feel like you wanted to join your dad's business when you got older?
Yeah, so I did. I kind of went round the houses in my kind of education working life. But after I finished uni, or left uni, I carried on working in the retail job I was in when I was studying, and then I went back to work for my dad about 10 years or so ago now. And that was a construction business, sort of specialised in high end development, turning offices into blocks of flats or dealing on high value residences in prime locations in London. And it was good fun actually. It was really good fun. You learn a lot. You realise um, that family businesses don't necessarily operate the way other businesses operate. I'd worked for Vodafone prior to that, so a big telecommunications conglomerate with KPIs and processes for everything, and then you go to work in a family business and you realise it's just everybody mucks in and things get done, and it's great because it gives you the other side of the coin, so you learn in your working life how things should be done from a process and a corporate point of view, and then you can see the other side of it of, well, we've got a limited budget and we've got limited resources and we don't have a person for every role, but with a bit of hard graft and some goodwill, you can get just as much done.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's interesting to see that contrast. I mean, not quite the same, but I've done it with a corporate recruitment company. They moved into a very kind of local business where there's only like 8 of you in there. A local consultancy, and it was, yeah, it's like chalk and cheese. One minute you've got
Yeah.
KPIs and targets to hit. For everything that you do, and then the next minute it's down to you now. You're the person responsible. You've got to shoulder that responsibility and make things happen. Otherwise, it's it's not going to work. And yeah,
Yeah, and I think
it's useful to
you
have
can
both
learn a lot
sides,
about
definitely.
yourself. You can learn a lot about yourself in those environments. Some people are just better suited to a bigger, more corporate environment, and some people are better suited on the cold face of it. And I was really fortunate to get both early on in my working life and work out what suits me best.
Sure. So, how did you find this role with Vodafone, and what were you doing? Because I'm guessing that was kind of after education, your first kind of major role.
Well, no, quite the opposite. So I went to uni. So I had a couple of years out after A levels, and I went to uni, and I needed a part time job. So I was, like most students, I was at the Uni of Surrey, so it's an expensive part of the world to live in. Rent or halls was expensive, food and beer was expensive, and life is expensive, right? So I wasn't in a position to not work. So I was selling phones in a retail store on the high street in Guildford, which I look back now and probably so far anyway the most fun part of my working life. I had an incredible time there, and I dropped out of uni. It wasn't really for me in the end. So I went from a part time role to a full time role, and moved into a business advisor role. So essentially liaising with SMEs in and around the sort of like Surrey area, looking after their requirements, whether that was micro businesses with an owner director type thing with one line, or taxi firms with 50 or 60 lines for all their drivers and whatnot. So it was a real range of clients, which I think is something I've used moving forward, um, and an awful lot of fun. A role that I got to for the first year and a half be sort of, it was a retail job. You're customer facing
Yeah.
every day, and then as it progressed and developed, and I realised that I wanted to try and do different things, I was able to move into a slightly more back office role and do some more management stuff, and then start helping out with business advisors across that region. Had 23 stores, so I would help those guys and see where they were at and try and bring them on in certain ways and help with some training and some development there. So it was something I look back on, and I'm really, really grateful for. People quite often turn their nose up at, phone sellers and retail jobs and those types of things, but it's an incredible way to cut your teeth and learn about customer service, and if you can do it in that environment, then I think you can probably take it onto most things.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was speaking to somebody else the other day about young people, and obviously I ask a lot of people their first roles in business, and um, yeah, a lot of people actually start out in these big corporate companies where perhaps there's a bit of a stigma attached, like maybe a fast food restaurant or something like
Yeah,
this, or yeah, mobile phones, or even in recruitment, like I mentioned. Those places are really highly structured, and their processes are in place, right? And that's a really good place to learn and get the core kind of working skills that you need to be successful when you maybe then become an entrepreneur, or yeah, go into a role where it's a bit more autonomous. So I think you're completely right. It must have given you a great base. And then you moved
I think
into your role with your dad. You said, is that right?
yeah. So just briefly on the Vodafone thing, going back onto what you said, I think it depends on the nature of the role, but our store was quite a small store, in terms of headcount, 8 of us really, but was at top 10 in the country in terms of performance. So when you've got a store like that that's got incredible people in it, and the manager at that store that I worked with was probably still had the most impact on my working life, even though I've worked with family for much longer than I worked there, because he gave us an insight into how that store performed, and it wasn't just metrics and KPIs; it was about profitability and attitudes towards certain things. So it's almost run like its own little business. Yes, you're part of this grander scheme, but actually, if you've got good people in leadership roles in those types of businesses, they can really inspire, great results, because you learn very quickly about how many staff do I need in and what we're trying to achieve on this day. So with no responsibility and no accountability for that cost or worrying about paying those wages or those bills, you can learn so much about it if you've got good people. And I was really fortunate in that regard.
Sure.
Really, really fortunate. And then yeah, I went to move on, um, to work with my dad. So I had my oldest son, was emigrating at the time with his mum. I thought that was the best thing for them at the stage. So I needed more flexibility around my working life. So for 6 months prior to him leaving the country, I could spend as much time with him as possible. And being in a retail role, you're sort of obligated to work a lot of weekends, which didn't fit in around Michael's school. So my dad at the time was a bit of a get out, to be honest. It was really, really flexible. And I thought to myself, I don't want to end up back on a building site in a construction environment, albeit in a pretty ropey, freezing cold site office. That wasn't how I envisaged my life long term at that point. So I agreed to go back and do it for 6 months, and he was really generous with my time. I could work, whenever I wanted. But again, it was great. It gave me the flexibility I needed in that time. And then I went back and as with all these things, you go back and you get an opportunity, and it can grow. It can grow and it develops into more than you think it's going to be. So I went back, lumping bricks basically because I had a need, and that was a means to an end.
Yeah.
And my dad wasn't great on a computer, so I would see things and say to him, "Look, you could do a bit of this, and that would make this a bit quicker or a bit cleaner, or you haven't got to do that 100 times every month. If you just set up a couple of templates, and we can find a way of doing it." And probably had these conversations with him every day from the first week, and he was so against it because he had a business with a 7-figure turnover that was giving him a nice life, and he worked the way he wanted it to work. And there I was, chipping in with the bits I'd learned and my sort of like younger attitude towards certain things, I suppose. But eventually he started to come round, and then I just started doing things and saying to him, right, well, look, now we've done it this way. What do you think about this? And we got there in the end. I think he suddenly saw some value in what I was trying to do, and I was trying to do it for the right reasons. And then it developed and grew. And I then very much became sort of like looking after the operations on a day-to-day basis. And that would be looking after suppliers, looking after clients, liaising with local authority. We did lots of work in conservation areas with listed buildings, and the bureaucracy around treating those buildings with the sympathy they need. You can't buy a 200-year-old building in the middle of London and do whatever you like to it. It takes some real thought and lots of work with local authority and the council to make sure that what you're doing is being done in the right way. Buildings are being treated with the respect they deserve, but also you can do enough to give the developer what they want on the back end, because they bought this beautiful, pretty building, but they want, it's a commercial enterprise for them, isn't it? They want to build something that's going to add value. So that was what my role developed into, looking after the guys on a day-to-day basis on site, and that would be anything from 5 to 50 blokes, depending on the job at any one time, and then dealing with the back end side of it as well, which was great again because you work across a real spectrum of people, people on short-term contracts who are in to do little bits, to people that are there for the long haul and have huge financial investment in the job.
I was going to say, you've got a broad amount of experience in that, really, because you're not just kind of pigeonholed into one role and dealing with the suppliers and that's it. You're dealing with the guys out on site. You're dealing with the developers, the suppliers. Then internally, it sounds like you're kind of optimizing a lot of the processes as well, and they're really good skills to learn. And I guess it was pretty tough at times, right? It normally is in the construction industry.
Incredibly so. It's when you look back on it, you kind of remember the good bits, right?
Yeah.
Or you try to, and maybe sort of like subconsciously blank out the bits that were hard. But yeah, incredibly tough, very difficult working conditions. We had one job where we demolished so much of the building. The only bit that was left was the basement, and we were in there over the winter. And I would get to work so early it would still be dark, and I would leave so late it would still be dark, and my office would be in a basement room with artificial light. And for 6 months you barely see the sunlight, and you don't realise the effect that's kind of having on you. So yeah, it's incredibly tough. Construction can be the most rewarding of industry, but also hard on small businesses, hard managing suppliers, hard dealing with subcontractors, because you've got a direct connection to the people whose rent or mortgages you're paying by employing them. If contracts hit a snag or a slow point, or something doesn't quite work out how it needs to go, it can be really, really difficult. And these large scale building projects, people drive past them and think everybody involved is making loads of money, but it's not always the case. Sometimes they're working to really fine margins, and things have to go well in order for them to be profitable. So it can be stressful, but when you get it right, it can be incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, I guess you get that real visual impact of the work that you've been doing as well, don't you? When you see the finished building or whatever it is.
Yeah, you've got something really tangible at the end. You have something really tangible at the end, and sort of taking the large financial upsides weren't ours. They weren't our own projects. They were a developer. So that really was, we got our final bill paid, and that was great. And then we had the sense of, that before and after, what we've been able to achieve in a 12 or 18-month project. And you learn so much. You learn so much about yourself, because when the chips are down, for want of a better phrase, and that you have to just muddy in and get stuck into it, don't you? And that's what we were saying right at the beginning, the nature of small businesses, whether that's family run or startups, or like you were saying, 8 people in an office, and your responsibility is to everybody, not just your job.
Yeah.
But yeah, you cut your teeth quickly.
Yeah. So let's move it up to kind of 2019, 2020 then, when you kind of took the next step in your career. Can you talk me through kind of what was going on in your world, in your life at that point in time?
Yeah, definitely. So I got to a point where I wasn't working with Dad anymore, and I was looking for a new role. I wanted to change, and then I suppose somewhat as I've explained, I was um, a young father. I didn't finish uni. I'd worked in a family business. I'd worked in a phone shop, and although I had this range of experience that I felt was really valuable, and now looking back on it, I know was hugely valuable. How you try and put that into a sound CV, and how you even get yourself in the door for a work opportunity or an interview, it's quite difficult. A lot of people have degrees these days. A lot of people have a much more traditional education and work route than I had. So I was kind of stumbling around looking for something. I didn't really know what I was looking for. And I found Aspray advertised as a project management role on a job site online, and I applied, or showed my interest, and they came back as okay, here's the brochure for this. It's not actually a job; it's a franchise opportunity. And
How did that
instantly, the
make you
penny.
feel? Sorry, just to stop you at that point there. How did that make you feel? Because obviously on a job board, slightly different kind of opportunity to normal, perhaps one that you weren't expecting. Um,
I remember it really clearly, because it felt instantly like a penny had dropped. You know, it was blind luck. I could have just scrolled over that project management job and gone to the next one. Um, but when it came back, I suddenly felt like, okay, hang on, this is something that I can set myself up for. Because if it had been a job, it probably would have been a very speculative application on my part. Um, but for all the reasons I've mentioned. But
yeah,
as soon as it becomes a franchise opportunity, then it changes. And I didn't know anything about franchising at this point. I hadn't been involved in it. It's not something I'd given any thought to at all prior to that point. Um, for the various reasons we've kind of discussed previously, it's not something that's really in the forefront of people's minds, particularly at 30 years old.
yeah,
But then it became a reality, something that it was very realistic for me then, because I had a brochure in front of me which outlined everything. It outlined what the type of person, work experience, character they were looking for, and I could see myself in those things. Um, it tells you how much money you need, what the investment is, and it's not the sort of figures that people associate with franchising, because all they do is think about McDonald's, and everyone thinks you need £1 million to do that.
yeah. I'm definitely
Um,
guilty of that one.
and maybe that's the case. I haven't looked at one. Maybe it is, but that isn't all that's out there. And I know that now, but I didn't know that then.
So for
So it suddenly
for
felt.
Aspray, then what was the license fee at that point in time?
So it's 20 at the time. It was £28,500
Yeah,
plus the VAT for the territory, and it's a national organisation, but you buy a very set geographic territory. So for me, I own under license a majority of the SW and SE postcodes, so South London. Um, and you can't really work outside of that. You certainly can't canvas and grow your business actively outside of that. But you can pick your territory. You can sort of, like, in discussion with them, work out which area is going to be best for you. Um, but they have a really good finance model in place. So even if you don't have all of that money available to you, because that isn't McDonald's money, but it's still an awful lot of money to a hell of a lot of people. It certainly was to me at the time. They have relationships in place with banks, high street banks, because of the model's proven.
yeah. This is
So
the
you
big
can
thing that shocked me
finance.
about the industry is that it is NatWest, HSBC, Lloyd's, TSB. They're actually
Yeah,
backing people to go out there and set up franchises, and I think especially younger people, it's just not something they're aware of, really, is it? I mean, I know I'm not young anymore, but I wasn't aware until kind of the last couple of years, and I think there's the same for you from the sounds of it.
100%, 100%. There's I don't know where it comes from, but there tends to be this assumption with franchising that you sort of you need loads of your own money. My attitude always was, well, if you just turned up with a check and you had enough zeros on it, they'd let you in, and that was it. You off and running. Aspray certainly isn't that. The recruitment process is incredibly robust. It's a regulated business, so they have to be incredibly thorough. Somewhat surprised I got in, I suppose, but must have been having a good day. But if you do meet the criteria, and if they decide that they want to make you an offer, because that's how it looks. Since you go through the recruitment process, you find out at the end if they're going to make you a formal offer. They have all of this in place. So with them at the time, it was NatWest, and they've got a relationship manager there. You can go and speak to NatWest. They've got a direct contact. Right, how much have you got? What do you need? The license is over 5 years, so you can set it up over 5 years, so it's affordable. So you've got a chance to be successful. And it isn't what people think it is. It isn't a case of, take out a whacking great big mortgage on your house or put all your life savings into it and leave yourself really threadbare and stressed, because you can't do, good sustainable work under those conditions. You need to be incentivized to work hard, obviously, but you need to be able to live at the same time, don't you? So
Yeah, sure.
they enable it, and I'm sure there's many other franchises that are the same. For the right people, they'll do an awful lot to get you on board and make it work.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the question I'd want to ask you at this point is, so your dad had his own business. Why not kind of look yourself down the kind of self-employment route? Why not kind of go into franchising? Because I guess, you might have seen that opportunity and that might have sparked something in you. Yes, why don't I do something like this? So yeah, why not try and set up your own company at this point?
Two reasons, I suppose. The first being that a question I get asked a lot is, why don't I just carry on doing what I was doing? I'm mindful of preaching. I've only been doing this for a while, but my kind of attitude towards business is, you have to be really, really aware of what you do and don't know, and you can't overvalue what you do know. So for me, I got good at my job, working for my dad, really good at it. And I was able to have real positive change and influence on the projects and the contracts that we were operating, and actually built some really good relationships with the project managers that would supply us work and our clients. But there was an awful lot I didn't know. And if you're going to take on a business with a 7-figure turnover, you need to be really, really on the ball. That is a big ask. That is not, you're not playing with pennies there.
Yeah.
And to take that business on, I would essentially have had to employ somebody who knew a huge amount more than me. And I'm happy and used to not being the smartest guy in the room. I've got no issue with that. But, if we would be so the last contract we did was £2.5 million. We built 12 units into an old office block. You can be a long way through that contract, and if you don't know everything you need to know about running that contract and the construction side of it, if you encounter an issue 9 months into a year-long project, for example, you can lose everything. You can lose the shirt on your back in the way the building work, the way construction works. I just didn't know enough. It was just too early for me to carry on doing things of that nature. And if I'd had somebody that I knew that I could have brought into the business at that time, it might have been a viable option. But I knew I just didn't know enough, and the risk was too great, whatever the financial reward might have been. So that was really the main reason for not carrying on or doing something very similar. And then also, I think at the time, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, was the truth of it. Like you alluded to earlier on, construction can be hard, it can be tough. And I didn't know that. The one thing I always knew from being a kid was I didn't want to work in building and in construction. I never really knew what I wanted to do when I was younger, but I knew what I didn't want to do, and that was it. And it's tough, because you get to a point where you're doing okay for yourself, you're making okay money, and whatever you go and do is probably going to mean a step back in that regard for a period of time.
Sure.
But you hope with the right strategy and the right application of your ability and effort that you'll get beyond that point, reasonably quickly. So that was kind of the decision. I had a lot of faith in my ability to work hard and find a way. And I suppose the truth is, maybe if Aspray hadn't come along when it did, maybe I would have gone and done something else. But that's the point, isn't it? You sort of put yourself out there. You keep having a look around. You can't be afraid of dipping your toe, and exploring, and then when it comes back to you, you make a calculated decision then. So I don't think I was ever against doing something else solely on my own, but I never really got that far through the process. Really, once I moved away from, well, I'm definitely not going to do this because of all the reasons I've outlined. I was probably open to everything at that point.
Yeah.
But Aspray felt like it was such a good fit from the outset, that I kind of stopped looking at that point. And as I said earlier on, that recruitment process is pretty robust. You have to provide a body of work in a relatively short time frame to prove your competency and to show that you're interested. And the deadlines are really firm, and there's no extensions, and that takes a lot of input. So I kind of focused on that, and by the time I come out the back of it, I knew that was where I wanted to be, and if they made me an offer, then I was all in on that.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's interesting that even though in a way it's you handing over the money, they're still interviewing you, right? They're still making sure they've got the right people in their business, because I guess and I've been franchisor side, what they want is successful people in their network. It's only a win for them, isn't it, if they can do that? Whereas if they fill up their team with people that they don't believe have got a chance to be successful, ethically that's not great, but also from a commercial standpoint, it's not great for them either. So I guess you can understand why it's so robust, right?
I think it has to be. I mean, I don't speak for Aspray now; I just speak sort of like more broadly. But
Yeah.
if you think about it from a franchisor point of view, typically, particularly with a model that is limited to the number of franchisees it can bring in. So I own that territory under license. Nobody else can work in that area. So they can only break the country down into so many parts if they want to make those parts big enough to attract people. So they have to be really, really selective, because my territory is sold to me on a license for 5 years. And if I did a terrible job of it, then the minimums that you need to hit on a year-by-year basis aren't particularly difficult to achieve. It's set up for you to be successful. So once you're in for 5 years, and they can't do an awful lot about that, really, providing you're compliant. But you could be compliant and not very good, and then all of a sudden you're not earning them any money, are you? You could be damaging the brand by the way that you go about your business. So from a franchisor point of view, they have to be selective. And as a franchisee, I think you want that.
Yeah.
I think you want it to be difficult, because what I want to know is that the people that buy the territories around me have been through what I've been through to get their foot in the door.
They're keeping the brand standards up, but because they're the
Well,
right type of
exactly
people.
that. Exactly that. Particularly for us, because we work in a regulated environment. So we're regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. There's a lot of red tape and bureaucracy that we have to jump through on a daily basis in how we operate and how we run our businesses, and that is not straightforward. So you want to know the people that are coming into the business and coming in as part of the brand understand that, are capable of it. I don't know why you would want it to be any other way. It'd be nice to just be able to get through that recruitment process to be less robust and take up a little less time. But once you're through the back of it, it's really worthwhile. And I remember one of the first calls I had with the recruitment manager at the time, and she said to me, "When you get through the end of this, we'll know if we want you, and we'll make you an offer or not. But you'll really know if you want us." And that's the way I looked at it. Yeah, it was a heavy period of time alongside my full-time job, but I got out the back of it, and I knew unequivocally that was for me. And if it hadn't been, I would have known that as well. And at that point, I'd have said, "Okay, well, regardless of what you think, I don't think it's for me. Thanks very much. Best of luck. See you down the road." So from a franchisee point of view, or a potential franchisee point of view, it gives you real clarity around, I'm going to go and put loads of money into this, and I'm going to commit to this for at least 5 years, but hopefully 10 or 15. And it gives you real confidence that it's the right decision. You get an opportunity to work with the people at head office and see how they operate, and how they respond to questions or things that you say that maybe you should know, or something that's a bit different to the way it's normally done. Are they receptive to that? Are they welcoming to that? Or are they really kind of standoffish and hard? Because you don't just deal with these people through the recruitment process. You deal with them on a daily, weekly basis, the way our business operates anyway, moving forward. That will always be there. So if you can't get on with them great in that phase, what does that tell you moving on?
And I think someone taught me a little while ago that you don't necessarily have to get on with them like friends, but you have to be able to get on with them in that work capacity, right? You just need to be able to have a good conversation, challenge each other, but also support each other along that process. And yeah, you don't have to be best friends, but you're right. You're totally right. It's important you can see yourself working with them for the next 5 years because that's what you're signing up to.
I think, yeah, it's exactly that, right? It's exactly that. If you went to work in an office on day one, you wouldn't know the 20 people in the office, and there's a good chance you wouldn't get on with a good number of them. But if there's a mutual respect and people are good at their job, what else do you need? Friendships are lovely and they can be built off of that. And maybe in time they develop and those relationships change. But what are you there for? You're there to perform a function or to deliver this. And if those people allow you to do that, and you working well and collaboratively allows them to do their bit, then that's all you really need as a basis, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. So, a moment ago, you mentioned the confidence to go ahead and invest in this license. Now, that's good for you, but how about your family at that point in time? How did they feel? And I think you had kids at that time, right? So, yeah, what
Yeah.
was that like?
Um, I think, I'm lucky, really lucky that my wife is incredibly supportive, and she trusts me, um, which is great because without that, what do you do? If you don't have that unwavering support, it makes it incredibly tough. She watched me have a real change in the family construction business. She watched me turn that, or not. That's probably not fair. She watched me develop it and help it grow, and saw that I was able to do that at a pretty good level in a relatively successful business that was quite significant. So I think she, in that way, I suppose I'd proven myself to her.
Yeah,
Um, and she watched me go through the recruitment process and understood how keen I was to get involved. And the beauty of Aspray is it was kind of the perfect melting pot of all of my skills. Um, those that I have and those that I don't have weren't, there's a lot more skills I don't have than I do, but the ones that I had suited perfectly to what we were trying to do and what we needed to do on a daily basis. And I think she could see that. Um, and we were in a very fortunate position where if it didn't make any money in 6 months, if it took a year to really get on its feet and get going, then that would be okay for us. We would have been able to get through. She was working and doing well, so if we had to just get through it and live on beans and toast for 6 or 9 months, then that was something we were willing to do because we saw the potential upside. But it's a risk, and if you haven't got that support, it must be incredibly tough.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. No,
but
it's
you have
it's
to
great
back.
you had that. Definitely, it's great you had that,
Yeah,
and I think it's important to involve them, your partner, husband or wife, whatever it is, in that decision making process because yeah, it's like you say, it might come to that, right? If things don't quite work out how you want them to. But I'd be interested at this point to find out kind of what your ambition was for joining Aspray. What was your kind of goal, or what is your what was your goal then? What you wanted to achieve.
um, so I am a bit of a dreamer, I suppose. I'm sort of like I'm always 2 years down the line. A lot of the time, even before I'd started, I remember the first face to face interview I had with the recruitment lady, and I said to her, well, this will be the first one, but I'll have another one soon, like another territory or second area. Um, so I went into it thinking that one would be great, but it wouldn't be enough, and that was really the outset, was to establish myself really quickly and get up to speed. Because whilst I had a construction background, I didn't know anything about insurance. So, and that's pretty fundamental to what we do. Um, so I identified quickly what I needed to learn. Thankfully, they're incredibly supportive, and the head office team are experts in that field, so you can fall back on them. And then I knew that I wanted to just really be the best. Um, and I'm a long way from that at this point. Um, but I know if I keep putting it in, I've got a good chance of, you know, getting in that conversation. There are some incredible people in the Aspray network that have been running their businesses for a long time. And I would be stupid and arrogant to suggest that I'm anywhere near that level of operation. But I know what I'm trying to be, and I'm not afraid to say that that's what I'm trying to be. I think you need to have that really clear goal and clarity around what you're trying to achieve if you want to have any hope of achieving it. So that goal probably hasn't really changed very much. I want to be, you know, as best as I can be. And I think if I keep putting it in, then I've got a chance of getting there. But we're an awful long way from that yet.
Yeah.
But that's the plan. We'll see where we are in a couple of years, but that's the plan.
Excellent. So, you started the franchise, or you started your business in January 2020, right? And for a lot of people, that's that's a bit of a bad time to start the business. So, just before a pandemic. So, for you, what did when the pandemic came around? What challenges did that present to you, and how did you and the business kind of cope?
Yeah, it's not the best time. Well, I suppose actually, in hindsight, it probably wasn't a bad thing. And yet, when you have these conversations, you have to be really mindful that we've got through it and been successful, but there are a huge amount of people that haven't because of the pandemic. So I don't want to make light of what it was for an awful lot of people, but speaking to our experience, I think it sharpened our tools really quickly. We learned pretty quickly that actually you need to be flexible and you need to be dynamic, I suppose. I'm not a big fan of that word in this context because it sounds a bit, disingenuous. But actually, Aspray had at that point a really well proven model around generating business and building relationships to keep continual business coming in. That a lot of that was quite traditional, and it was boots on the ground, knocking on doors, getting out and building relationships face to face. And that 6 weeks in just disappeared for me. So my first day in the field, if you like, after my training was the 9th of Feb. And we went into lockdown on the 24th of March. And those 2 dates are kind of like forever etched in my memory because it was six weeks, and you go through the recruitment and you go through the training, and you've got 6 weeks of running around, making it up as you go along, trying to work out, okay, this is exciting. How can I go? I'm there and I'm here and I'm doing all these things. And then it stops. And it really did stop. Like people forget at this point how stringent that lockdown was straight out the gate. It stopped all those things. And London was a hotspot. They were telling you, do not go into central London unless you absolutely need to. Unless it's a matter of life or death, stay out of there. And I have to go in there every day for work. So it became difficult, but exciting at the same time because we had work coming in. We had claims we had to resolve. And at that time, more than ever, people needed to be in their homes. So you couldn't have people dislodged, or Airbnb stopped and hotels stopped. So we didn't have anywhere to send them if they couldn't be in their home. So actually, it proved that, or it created a need. The need was you just have to get on with it. You've just got to find a way to make it work. And sometimes in business, that's the best way. When your back's against the wall, you kind of learn what you're made of, don't you?
Yeah,
We had huge issues with supply chain, getting material getting material into the country was impossible. So to try and then be at the front of the queue with suppliers when you wanted stuff, particularly when we were a new business and they've got customers they've had relationships for 10 or 20 or 30 years, there were difficult conversations to be had. Likewise with contractors. Suddenly no one wanted to travel into London. If they did, they wanted a premium for it. But insurers weren't going to pay over the odds, and rightly so. Why should they? So then you have to try and find a way to make it work from a financial point of view so that contractors are appropriately compensated, but there's enough margin left in it for us to make it worth our while. But there's always a way. There is always a way if you are looking for it. If you decide, actually, there's a global pandemic on, we're not meant to travel into London, I can't do it the way I've been taught to do it, I'll just sit it out and wait for it to change. But the business probably fails because how long has COVID gone on for? Nobody knew then what it was going to be. But then say you sit it out for 6 months and then you go, okay, well now this is going to be a year, 2 year, 3 year problem. Who knows? I need to get back into it. You're so far behind the curve. All those relationships you're starting to build have fallen away. We didn't have a choice. You just have to get on. We had clients that we had to look after and we had to provide for. So COVID was difficult, but it proved to me really quickly the value of the franchise, really. I was told in the early stages of recruitment that it was a recession-proof business. And you hear that and you think, okay, of course you're going to say that. And then you question it and you look at it and you go, actually, the way this business is structured, from our point of view, we know everybody that's got a mortgage on their house has got it insured, and we know that things go wrong, regularly. So if we can continue to get ourselves in there and people are aware of us, we have a constant stream of work coming. So it should be recession proof. And the pandemic really created a very similar environment, didn't it? People weren't rushing to spend any money. People weren't rushing to do anything they weren't absolutely obligated to do. But when things go wrong, they don't have a choice. It's in their best interest to get it resolved. And making use of their insurance policy, which they're still obligated to have, is the best way of resolving it. So it proved really early on, it gave us lots of confidence that actually the business does stand up, the model does stand up, and all the things that we were told were true. So then you kind of know you're onto a winner, providing that you can deliver.
That's that support piece that you mentioned there. I think that's really important. Not only because you've got somebody you can ask questions to, but especially in a changing environment like the one you found yourself in during COVID, where, like you say, some of the old kind of methods, you couldn't actually execute the business through those old methods in terms of getting to know people or getting the business out there. You've got then multiple heads working on the solution, right? Not just you on your own trying to figure out the solution. You've got other franchisees doing the same thing, as well as the head office team trying to help you achieve that as well. And I think that the value of that alone is probably worth a good chunk of that license fee, right?
Oh yeah, multiple times over. If you think about it, say you had that problem and you didn't know how to deal with it, and you're 6 weeks into a business that you've spent a lot of money setting up. Where do you even begin? If you try and outsource that strategy piece, what's that going to cost you? I've absolutely no idea. But a big chunk of change that we didn't have at the time. And those people are never going to be as invested in solving that problem in the efficient way that you are, because you're paying them to do it.
Yeah.
But when you've got a network of 50 or 60 people who have exactly the same problem and challenges and circumstances that you have, and because of the scale of the pandemic, everyone in the country had that problem. So it wasn't just London-based. It wasn't just the guys in Scotland or wherever they may be. Everyone in the network had the same issue, and subsequently, so did head office. So you're 100% right. That kind of melting pot of ideas was invaluable. You can't put a price on what that was worth or what it would have cost if you were trying to do it, outsource it.
Yeah.
And because everyone knew the challenges, you didn't have to explain anything to anybody. Everybody just knew what the problems were. So everybody had exactly the same endpoint. Everyone had the same goal. We had lots of calls. No one had ever heard of Zoom before the pandemic, and then suddenly everybody's never off of it. But at that time, we had lots of calls with other franchisees and head office staff talking through, well, what about this and what about that, and this might work. And that was incredible, because you'd go on and you'd share, oh, I did this the other day and this was quite useful. But then you'd hear somebody else give you something that was, even more concise or even more efficient, or a little workaround on doing certain things. And yeah, it was hugely valuable. And I suppose that in itself, if you're looking for an advert for franchising, getting through the really tough times, the unforeseen circumstances that no one's been in before, and to my knowledge and the people I speak to at Aspray, sort of like other franchisees, license holders that I've become friendly with and engaged with regularly, no one's saying they're struggling. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's been difficult, but actually, they've all still got work.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. It's definitely good to hear. So, how has your business then grown over the last couple of years?
To be honest, it hasn't grown in terms of number of people quite as quickly as I was hoping it was going to. Tried to bring somebody in the middle of last year, made an appointment, brought them in. Didn't work out quite quickly. They decided to go off and do something else, which I think was probably better for them and better for us in the long run. So we're currently recruiting now for another project manager / loss assessor to come in and help manage claims. And that's the next phase for us, because at the moment we're limited to the number of claims that I can run at any one time. And actually, if we bring somebody else into the business, it's twofold. One, they can take some of that load and we can increase the volume of claims that we're able to manage and look after. But also, if it frees up some of my hours to then go and do some more sales and business development, then that supply increases further. So for us, the first year was just about breaking even, really, isn't it? You just want to survive. And the second year, to the same to a certain extent, when it didn't work out with that that recruitment early doors. And I suppose that's one of the things with being a small business. That was the first time I'd really gone through that process properly. It didn't work out, and it bugged me and it bothered me for quite a while, to the point I'm only really getting back into it now, because I was kind of hesitant for a little while. But you have to dust yourself down and accept that, maybe it was me, maybe it was them, maybe it was circumstance, but regardless, it's been and gone. And we were doing it then for a reason. It was the right reason. And now we have to set ourselves up and go and do it again. So the plan is to expand in terms of the number of people we've got, so we can really attack the South London area that we're in. We could go and get another territory, but that's just more area to cover with, effectively less resources. And I don't want to spread ourselves too thin. I don't want to bring somebody into the business and then ask this, have a load of unrealistic expectations of them early doors, because we've put ourselves in a scenario that is just not manageable. I'd rather be, retained into our relatively small patch of southwest and southeast London, do a really, really good job of that, and then if the second territory is viable at that time, great. And if a third person comes into the business or a fourth person comes into the business, then fantastic. But yeah, I'm in no rush.
Yeah.
Like I said to you right at the beginning, when you said, like, what were the goals, I was in a real rush at the beginning. There were a load of things I didn't know, a load of things I didn't appreciate. And as you do it, you suddenly realise, hang on a minute, this is more than just numbers on a spreadsheet and volume of claims and all the rest of it. There's people and various stakeholders here, and doing it is one thing, but doing it well is something entirely different.
Yeah.
And so now the focus is set up around, let's find the right person, let's get them in, let's let them get up to speed and doing the job brilliantly well, and then we'll go again. Multiple territories and 7-figure turnovers are still very much the plan. Like we said at the beginning, there's nothing wrong with having big ambitions and big goals, but you can rush to them really quickly, and then your business is built on really fragile legs, and it all just kind of like falls away from underneath you. And that's what we're trying to avoid. We want to try and build it with really, really solid foundations.
Yeah, I think
Because
it's interesting to
we
see
don't
how
have to be in a
your
rush.
kind of your thoughts have changed from that 2 years ago to now, because in the grand scheme of things, that's not a long amount of time, really, is it? But I guess it's just different modes that you're in at those points in time. So at the beginning, you had to see the potential of where it could go, so that you come out of the traps really fast, I guess. But then as you get to know everything, like you say, you get that kind of knowledge piece in place. You go, okay, now I know what's realistic, and you can still have those longer term targets that are quite ambitious, but you at least now you're in that position where you know how to do that, and what's easily achievable, and what's the stretch target, I guess, which is what you're going to go for from the sounds of things. It sounds like what you're going to do is employ people in the Southwest Territory and get them to a point where they're able to perhaps manage that territory, and then you could take on the next one once you're ready to, and then build that one out, right?
It's exactly that. That's exactly it. Because you're right. The knowledge is key. At the beginning, you have all the things you think you know, and then as you actually start doing it day to day, you realise the things you do know and all the things you got wrong, if you're really honest with yourself. And I think being really honest with yourself about where you're at and how you're trying to get there, where you're trying to get to, is hugely important. Certainly for us, we could have just lumped somebody in and run at it, but you're trying to hold on to too many things, and I don't think that's sustainable. I think it's too aggressive, and we've got enough work to now allow that person to come in a really good, in a really nice way, a really calm environment where I know more about what I'm doing. I'm a year on from when I was first trying to bring somebody in, which is 100% more experience than I had at that time. So at this point in the business, a year is a really long time. So once we can get somebody in, hopefully they are capable of doing the job we recruit for and then growing with the business. That's kind of the plan. The plan is to bring people in and then, never really hire at a senior level as the business grows into something of that scale. Just always look to bring people in, provide opportunity for young people, and then grow it and develop it in such a way that there's a really clear path. Well, that was the first person that came in, and this is where they are now. And then that was the second person that came in, and they're on their own journey to that, and then so on and so on. And then as that happens, we will need more area. um, but the expansion through Aspray at that point is pretty straightforward. Um, I know what that looks like. I know how it's done. I've had those conversations, so um, it will come. I'm sure it will come in time. But I guess it depends what your priorities are.
Yeah,
And for me, it's doing it right rather than doing it quickly.
sure. So I'm asking this question in case there's somebody listening who's potentially looking to buy into a franchise, and I'm not saying Asprey, but for any. So I'm thinking as they're doing their research and they're speaking to the franchisor, um, from your experience, which I know is limited to Asprey, but um,
Mm-hmm.
do you think that franchisors are in a position to be able to give you the full picture from day one of this is realistic or this is what you should be aiming at? I'm thinking, you know, I- I'm assuming you weren't misled in what your ambitions on what your target should or could be. But I'm just trying
Mm-hmm.
to think, when people are at that point when they're digging into those numbers in a little bit more detail, what should they be kind of cautious of, maybe?
Yeah, I think. Well, in answer to your first question, there's absolutely no reason why franchisors can't give you really accurate details around what is and isn't achievable. Um, and again, I know from my experience that what I was told bore out perfectly. So from what I was told of, good year one looks like this. This is achievable, which seemed like quite a big number. Actually, we did more than double that year one. So they can. I'm sure they all do. I don't know. Like you said, I'm only limited to where I've been, which is just Asprey in that regard. I think would be what I was encouraged by when I went through Asprey is that I challenged a lot of those numbers I was given, and I got really good answers. And I think if you're challenging numbers and you're getting told, well, that's just the way it is, and yet of course it can be done because there's a guy over there that did it. That isn't always good enough. If people are happy to have a conversation with you and talk to you about it in detail and answer your questions properly rather than giving you a politician's answer that dances around the houses and answers a different question, um, then you have to have some faith and some confidence in it. But also, you know, you have to back yourself. You have to back your gut. If it seems too good to be true and you can't find justification for it and you can't prove it to yourself, then perhaps it is. And I think I was really lucky. The first one I found has worked out really well for me. But um, if it hadn't, you have to be brave enough to step away and go, okay, well, maybe that one isn't for me this time. Or maybe I haven't quite got what they're looking for. Or I can't quite get that to add up in my own head. And the research I've done and the due diligence I've done on market size and their share of the market and the potential clients in my area, if you're buying something like I've got, which is a restricted territory, how many residential addresses and commercial addresses are there in that area was massive for me because you know that's potentially the maximum size of my business, isn't it? At any one time, and then I can work back from there. Well, how often do these things happen, and when they do happen, what's the average value of them? And then I can apply what I know around cost and contractors and all the sort of ancillary costs of getting it done to give myself a pretty good idea of where I'm at. Um, Something that Asprey did that was great actually, and I imagine a lot of franchisors would do this, is they showed me the good, the bad, and the ugly, if you like. They showed me their best ever year one, and they showed me their average year one, and they showed me a bad year one. And they were anonymous. I didn't know who they were, but they were apparently figures from people that had been there. So you get a real insight into what it looks like, which is great because they're not just showing you the headline stuff.
Yeah.
If someone's only showing you the good and they're not showing you where people have failed, then that would make me question why not?
Yeah.
Because there's going to be people that fail at everything,
I mean,
and the more transparent people are about it, the better.
yeah, I mean, the reality is for any franchise organization, it doesn't matter whether it's a McDonald's or anywhere, there's still a risk. It's still your own business. You're still self-employed, and you could end up with zero. Now, okay, it's not so likely, perhaps in some places where you kind of got that open the door and revenue comes in. But even then, you've got to manage the staff properly. You've got to make sure they're delivering how they should be. You've got to still do that work, haven't you, to get to that point? And if you're lazy about it, there's always the risk that it's not going to happen. or even a pandemic
Yeah.
might hit, and it might mean you have to shut your doors if you're the wrong sort of business, So, yeah, I think that's really good advice. What you're saying there is see if you can find out the good, the bad, and the ugly, and not. I don't think people should let that put them off, right? That there is somebody in the network who's perhaps not performing so well,
No,
because
I mean,
they're individuals at the end of the day.
you're
It's not a true reflection of the franchise necessarily.
and also something that I put in my own mind relatively early on is you're buying a business, you're not buying a job. Okay, so you're not. While somebody else may have failed, they weren't working exactly the same way you're going to work. You're not given a job description. You just fulfil this role, and then you are successful or otherwise. It isn't that. There's so many more intangibles to operating your own business. And if you're starting out in franchising and you're doing it from scratch, yes, you rely on your franchisor and the model, but you have to back yourself. You have to rely on yourself and be really, really honest around where you've been and where you're trying to go. And yeah, other people failing is no precursor that you will fail, unless they're all failing. And then maybe there's an issue with the model. But if the model shows success and it shows longevity and margin, then what's the franchisor in business for? They're in business to make money, albeit by providing opportunity for other people to do that. But that's the nuts and bolts of it. And if you're going to become part of that network, they want you to be successful. Particularly one where you're paying a fee or a percentage or however your ongoing royalty is decided. Um, you're aligned. Your success is their success, and vice versa. So, yeah, I actually think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that because it tells you that there are both sides of the coin. It makes it really clear in your head. You don't want to go into a thing that's going to be easy. Everyone's successful, and you can work, 10 till 3 every day and nip off for a round of golf every other day, which I would like to do, but we're not quite at that stage yet. You need really clear, realistic expectations of what it's going to take, and as long as you know you can be successful and you understand what you need to do and you're willing to do it, then I don't think there's too many things holding you back.
Fantastic. Well, look, Jack, I know we've sort of coming towards the end of an hour, so I've got a few questions I want to ask you before we wrap up things. And the first one is one that I love asking everybody, actually, because it just brings out some interesting stories. But that's I'd like to find like a weird, strange, or funny story that you've had in your career.
To be mindful of which ones I can tell you. I spent a lot of time on building
I was
sites.
going to say, in construction, I bet there's a few.
Yeah. Certainly not pre-watershed, that's for sure. I don't really know. I was waiting for you to ask me about the inspiring one. I had a great one lined up for that. But in terms of weird and funny, it's a really good question. I had we had when I was at Vodafone, we had, because we were based in Guildford, we had it's quite an affluent area. We get quite a lot of celebrities coming from time to time. You would quite often get celebrities coming in. You would see the different sides of certain people. You get those who would sort of like stroll in and stop and wait to be waited on hand and foot and really aware of who they were. And then you get other people that would come in and I served a lady once who was one of the lead actresses in Harry Potter, and she came in, older lady, hat on, khaki on a little chain around her neck, scraggy old coat, and I was sat there with for about, I don't know, 30 seconds before she sort of like told me her name, and then it became apparent, and I was just like, is this the person who I think it is? Is this her? And it really kind of threw me off because she wasn't presented in the way you would sort of like expect her to be. So that was strange, that sort of like interaction with people that you expect to behave in a certain way and you see behave in a certain way. In terms of funny, Aspray doesn't have a whole lot of funny in it, I'll be honest. Typically you turn up someone's houses, collapsing or falling down around them. It's not the time to be cracking jokes.
No David Brent sort of going into that sort of environment, is there?
Yeah, not really. And I spend most of my working day outside of that environment working on my own, and I'm not the funniest guy either. So it's I don't know. Is the honest answer.
Well, let's jump into your inspiring or proud moment then.
So I have two. The inspiring one, I only learned about this recently. Actually, I was at the Aspray conference, and it got postponed, so we had it in January. And I was talking to a lady there who runs Aspray Sunderland, And when the storms came in recently, not the most recent ones, but the ones at the end of the year, she had 104 claims come through in 3 days.
Wow.
And that is such a colossal workload, because you're talking about storm damage. So you're talking, trees through people's roofs and, significant damage to their property. And I spoke with her for about an hour, and then afterwards started to kind of like poke at her and jest with her a little bit, and it became a point of fun. But that was incredible to me. I know how busy I am, and I think I'm pretty busy. But 104 claims in 3 or 4 days is huge. And there's lots of big insurance companies that will be dealing with thousands and tens of thousands of claims in that period. But they are huge organisations. This lady is Sarah, her name is one person, and she must have incredible relationships with her suppliers and her contractors and the people that she works with on a daily basis to be able to. She kind of explained how she triaged it. Where was an immediate threat to life? That's obviously a priority. Everything else falls by the wayside, and then you kind of like get round to it as and when you can. And this business is fantastic from the flexibility it gives you with your lifestyle, and the financial rewards can be great if you get really good at it. But the real key thing that we get to every day is look after people and really have a tangible effect on them and their homes when they're really struggling. And to be able to do that, the way she did it for such a huge amount of people and families in such a condensed time, I came away just thinking, Christ, like I said at the beginning when I said, I really want to be the best, and I know I'm nowhere near it yet. And you hear stories like that, and you think, yeah, you've got a long way to go. You've got a really, really long way to go, because I wouldn't even know where to begin with 104 claims in such a short period of time. It's incredible,
Yeah.
incredible to do it, and like I said, to do it well, not just to do it, but to do it really, really well was a phenomenal effort.
I guess that's another
So
benefit
that,
of being part of a larger network, right? It's not very often you're the best in a group of people, is
yeah,
it? So
yeah,
there's always someone to learn from and aspire to be like, I guess, or learn, in terms of the
it's exactly
figures and
that.
numbers, anyway.
Yeah, well, and how they conduct themselves and how they operate. Because if you're trying to be the most commercially viable, you might be, but that will probably only be short term. Whereas if you're just trying to be the best person, the best loss assessor in our case, and you do that for all the right reasons and all the things that should entail, then the financial reward will come in time. You have to be patient for it. So yeah, from an inspirational point of view, that's something that since I saw her in January has really stuck with me. Um, and from a proud point of view, as you alluded to at the beginning, I was really fortunate to pick up the BFA Next Generation Franchisee Award in November, which was silly, really. It was sort of like came out of nowhere. Wasn't expecting it at all. Went through the sort of process. You can't nominate yourself; you have to be nominated by your franchisor. And Aspray decided that I was their guy for that award this year. Put me forward. And with loads of help from the marketing team, helping me kind of with the application process and the interview process, because that was 2 or 3 different phases.
Yeah.
Yeah, turn up on the night, just not really knowing what to expect. And friends and family said to me, "Oh, well, are you going to win?" Well, you don't know till you get there. You don't go all that way knowing what's going on. You just go because you've been nominated, and just to be in the final four was incredible. And there were some fantastic stories. You sit there. It's a gala event. It's all very pretty. You have your meal, and then they play the videos on the screen of the other nominees in each category. And I sat there thinking, there was myself, another guy, and 2 ladies, and I sat there thinking, they are all incredible. You're optimistic, right? You really hope that you've got a chance of getting it, and the guy had like a 7-figure turnover in next to no time, and was doing incredible stuff with temporary HGV drivers, which at the time was so topical and such a difficult
Yeah.
challenge to solve. And one of the ladies was a football coach for young kids, and she, as far as she could, continue to provide these football coaching courses free of charge throughout COVID, because families were struggling with income and couldn't afford it and stuff. And so you sit there and you think, well, we had a good run and we did well to get this far, because how am I competing with that? And then to pick it up actually was ridiculous. Was over the moon, and it was really nice to get some external validation of what you're doing,
Yeah.
because internally you have conversation with people every day and you get a sense that you're doing the right things. But externally from something like the BFA and the people that you're up against, and the credibility of the people making the decision as well. My wife tells me I'm great, once a week if I'm lucky. But for somebody outside of the house to tell me I'm doing an all right job was really, really nice. So yeah, they're probably the two things. Sarah's achievements are massively aspirational, and the BFA thing was, yeah, really surprising, and quite humbling, I suppose.
Yeah, and that's a room full of entrepreneurs, right? So there are a lot of founders of
Yeah,
businesses and franchisees in that room as well. So yeah, it must have been awesome to get that validation from that many people.
yeah,
So
across all industries as
yeah,
well, and of all scales. There was dog walkers and swimming coaches, and there was a guy that's got 25 Costas. There's a whole range of businesses, like you say, and just a great thing to be involved in, to be honest. And so much you can learn from all of those people with different backgrounds and different attitudes towards getting things done.
yeah, it's really cool. Well, look, we're definitely going over the hour here, so I'm gonna finish off with my last question, and I think this one will be really interesting to hear from yourself. I know you've already given lots of advice already, though. But if you were to give anybody who's looking into buying a franchise license, whether it's Aspray or any others, what what one piece of advice would you give to them?
I would say discount everything you think you know, because there are far too many preconceived ideas about franchising, and people will rule themselves out of it before they've even really opened the door to have a conversation. So if you have even the slightest inkling that it might be for you, um, forget everything you think you know. Whether that's how you think about yourself and talk about yourself and your past experiences, they aren't going to hold you back as much as you think they might. Mine certainly didn't with me. It, there are as fewer barriers to entry than you think there are for the right franchise, for the one that's for you. It's not going to be McDonald's in £1,000,000. Maybe it is. Good luck if it is, but the chances are it isn't. So you'll find something that suits, um, and then back yourself. If you do your due diligence and you do your research, you're so much further ahead than you think you are, because there's so many people that wouldn't even bother to do that. So you're better off, you're better suited to it than you even think you may think you are at that point. And if you decide it's for you, then yeah, what else is stopping you? The only thing that will stop you is you. And I think if you can get out your own way, then there's no reason why it can't be successful, whatever it is.
Awesome, Jack. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing so much about your life and your business. I really appreciate it, and thank you for all the advice that you've given to the audience as well. So yeah, thanks, and have a
My
great day.
pleasure. Yeah, you too. Thanks very much.
Cheers.